again. Welcome to the second episode of the Bigfoot / Sasquatch Chronicles. Again, very excited to be here. Today, in this episode, we're going to talk about the 8 Canyon incident. And if you're not familiar with that incident, it happened in 1924 up in the Washington State area. A group of miners were mining for gold, basically. And this is kind of a scarier story, in my opinion. You know, put yourself in these shoes. We got some more details, and he'll fill in the blanks here in a minute. But basically what it was they kept hearing some kind of creature or creatures in the night, scratching and, you know, things like that. There's a big canyon between them and their cabin, and they kept seeing this creature come out. Well, finally one of them shot it, and then all of them ended up shooting it. It either fell, succumbed to the gunshot wounds, or slipped. There's, you know, not a definitive answer on that, but it basically fell, and they thought, okay, we got it. They went back in the cabin, and they were going to go to sleep. All of a sudden, they start hearing, you know, some pretty, you know, hard force, you know, things hitting the cabin, which come out to be large rocks, boulders, and there was about 7 or 8 of these things throwing it at the cabin, banging on the door, trying to get in. There was a report of one time it trying to crawl through the floor. They finally had kind of gotten through the roof, and they were throwing rocks through there. And this evidently happened all night. Finally, you know, morning came. They looked around. They didn't see that these creatures were there anymore, and they got their stuff and got out, and they never went back since. And evidently, at the time, this was a hot spot for gold.
Yeah.
They refused to go back. So, you know, that's kind of the outline of it, and that's what we're going to dive into today.
Yeah. These guys were all miners. One of them was Marion Smith. Leroy Smith was, I think, his nephew or his son. Fred Beck, I believe, was one of the main guys in this story, and he had a conversation with Roger Patterson years and years, 40-something years later. You know, the guy, obviously, the Patterson film and all that. Yeah, pretty scary. Happened up in Pacific Northwest, off the south side, I believe, of the Mount St. Helens mountain up there.
That's the same mountain that blew up in, what, 1980?
1980, changed the geography of that area heavily. So, though there have been a few people, one, I think, in particular, a Bigfoot enthusiast, researcher he claims he's been able to, I think his name is Mercer, or his last name is Mercer or something like that. He claims to have found possibly the location of that cabin, the miner's cabin from back there in 1924. This, I think, is one of the first very descriptive tales of you know, the Bigfoot encounter, and also probably, and we could talk about this later, I guess, is, you know, the demeanor, the overall nature of the Bigfoot, you know, from region to region changes. You know, there have been reports of, well, I'd say the sum of a lot of the reports over the last 100 years or so sort of fall in categories of, you know, they're either very inquisitive creatures, they're curious, they're sort of docile, they're more afraid of us than we are of them. But most of those reports come out of the Pacific Northwest,
Yeah.
Washington, Oregon, Northern California, and then, you know, a lot of the reports of the more aggressive ones come out of like the Northeast and the Southern regions. But this one happened to be, but again, you know, some people would say that, dude, if you're, you know, if you got a family or a clan or whatever, or tribe, and you shoot one of mine, well, I'm coming after you.
Well, yeah, and you know, it's interesting, some of the things that I've read too. Like you said, their attitude can change almost instantly. They're very docile. They don't want to be messed with, and at the same time, they're very curious. So they'll be wandering around you. And then there are reports out there where they're very aggressive, and obviously this was a little different because, again, the Pacific Northwest they're very docile. They don't like to be messed with. But again, what was reported is that they, you know, basically, I mean, if it fell into this canyon, what they said, and the canyon was pretty deep, this creature died. And again, if it's part of this clan or a tribe, then you can see the reaction. what makes it scary to me is not only, put yourself in that position. There's big rocks being thrown at this cabin. There's a creature outside trying to get inside the door, and they're not going in there to have a cup of coffee with you. But they don't go to the point where they can go in there and, they didn't rip anybody's limbs off. They didn't do anything. It was a very stern message. And that also makes me believe that there is some sort of level of knowledge to this creature. It's not just a big dumb ape.
Right, right.
They knew what they were doing. They did it. And this is, like I said, if you're interested in Bigfoot, this is definitely some kind of encounter that you should read up on. It's very scary. It's very dark, and it is interesting.
I'm going to dive into one of the books we used last time and just read an excerpt from that. But, one thing I guess we might as well say too is that, this is almost 100 years ago.
Yeah.
And, obviously back then, whether it be miners or hunters or nature enthusiasts, nobody had the kind of technology we've got now.
Yeah.
They had their wits about them. They had their experiences, which I'm sure, being miners and being accustomed to being outdoors, was vast, I imagine. And they had rifles, but that was it. They didn't have GPSs. They didn't have infrared vision goggles or anything like that. Of course, that stuff didn't exist. So they had to rely on what they had, the little of what they had. But I'm going to go ahead and just read an excerpt out of this book again that I read from last time, and just see where we go from there. Typically, Bigfoot is not known as a violent creature. There are, however, exceptions to the rule. One classic disturbing example occurred back in the summer of 1924 in a canyon in the vicinity of Kelso, Washington. As evidence that tales of Bigfoot are not solely limited to the last few decades, a story was reported at the time in the pages of the Oregonian newspaper. An extract of the salient points reads thus. The strangest story to come out of the Cascade Mountains was brought to Kelso today by Marion Smith, his son Roy Smith, Fred Becker, Gabe Lefevre, and John Peterson, who encountered the fabled, quote, mountain devils or mountain gorillas of Mount St. Helens this week, shooting one of them, being attacked throughout the night by rock bombardments of the beast. The reference to the mountain gorillas is notable, given that this was decades before Bigfoot. Both the name and the beast became part of popular culture, and we'll talk about that too. It demonstrates lore and tradition of the hairy giants were already firmly in place. The Oregonian continued. The men had been prospecting claim on the Muddy, a branch of the Lewis River about 8 miles from Spirit Lake, 46 miles from Castle Rock. They declared that they saw 4 of the huge animals, which were about 400 pounds and walked erect. Smith and his companions declared that they had seen the tracks of the animals several times in the last 6 years, and the Indians had told them of mountain devils for 60 years. But none of the animals have ever been seen before that point. The night's events were decidedly traumatic, as the newspaper noted. Smith met with one of the animals and fired at it with a revolver. Thursday, Fred Beck has said, shot one, the body falling over a precipice. That night, the animals bombarded the cabin where the men were stopping with showers of rocks, many of them large ones, knocking chunks of the log cabin out, according to the prospectors. And then it says, 42 years later, Bigfoot enthusiast Roger Patterson from the Patterson film conducted a question and answer session with the by then elderly Fred Beck, who was happy to talk about his memories of that tumultuous night when Bigfoot went wild. Beck told Patterson, I want to tell you, pretty near all night long they were on that house, trying to get in, you know. We kept a shooting. Get up on the house, we'd shoot up through the ceiling at them. Couldn't see them up there. You could hear them up there. My God, they made a noise. Sounded like a bunch of horses were running around there. Talked about his description of the beasts. They was tall. They looked to me like they were 8 feet tall, maybe taller, and they were built like a man. Little in the waist, big shoulders and chest, and their necks was kind of like what they call bull necks. That was one of the foremost members of the crew.
Yeah.
Talking to Patterson in the 60s, 43 years later.
Well, and then Patterson going on to find Bigfoot,
Right.
allegedly.
Right.
Uh, this is interesting. This is the first, really big incident, and it wasn't called Bigfoot then. The findings of large hairy beings goes back to like the 1850s in the newspaper. It was called just a wild man in the woods. And some of them thought it was just, what I guess a quote you would use in modern times is hillbillies living up in the woods.
Right.
And, then the discovery of the ape and the gorilla, then it was, it's a big ape gorilla type thing. Bigfoot was never used in the U.S. at first. It was used in Canada, it was used in Japan and other places. Well, then it started to spread around here, and then these guys working with some Indian tribes, that's where the term Sasquatch came from.
Right.
And so that's where you go. But it's very interesting. Well, and I mean, I don't want to say interesting because it had to have been terrifying to be in that moment. But it's, the first big encounter. And, like I said, this is 1924, and there's no footage, there's no film. It's just off of this guy's word. But I mean, I don't think he ran out and told anybody, right?
No. I mean, at the time, I think the paper knew a little bit, but he didn't expound on anything until he met Patterson in the 60s.
It took him till 1960 or the 60s to say so?
Yeah, it
Wow.
just, because obviously back then too, and especially before Jerry Crew and the Bigfoot, the
quote unquote.
Yeah, the cast of that giant foot in the 50s. And especially before then, anyone who saw a creature like that, you probably were regarded as a nut.
Yeah.
Or, nowadays people talk about UFOs are still on the fringe and stuff like that. So, yeah, you were relegated to, you were ostracized. People didn't believe you. They mocked you. So why would these guys, especially Marion Smith and a family member or two of his, son or nephew, and then friends of theirs, this whole crew, why would they, why would you sit down and say to each other, let's concoct this story of a giant hairy beast, 8-9 feet tall, throwing rocks? Why would you do that?
Well, and also you're talking about basically alienating a spot where their bread and butter was.
That's right.
I mean, evidently, like I said, that was a hot spot for gold mining.
Yeah.
And something about you have to file some kind of a labor agreement with the state or the county so you could mine up there. And then people could just walk up and say, hey, I'm mining here.
Right.
This is my spot. So, and the other odd thing about this whole thing is after this incident has allegedly occurred, they filed with that labor, whatever that Washington, I'm not 100% familiar with that. They filed it that the job was completed. There was no more gold in that area. And they filed that the date was the day of the incident.
Yeah, that's
so.
right, yeah.
Why would you sit down and cockamamie this whole story and then say, hey, but we can't come up here and come mining anymore?
That's right.
Oh, well, but we're going to make millions. We're just not going to tell anybody.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of holes, at each side of it. Now, again, to play the devil's advocate, you sure it wasn't just apes, I mean, because apes do act like that, gorillas. But as I'm saying this, it doesn't make sense in my mind because I don't think there's any gorillas in the Washington area, even in the 1920s.
No.
So it's really hard to try to debunk this, And again, I'm not a poster boy for either side. I want to know the truth. And I don't have, I haven't had an experience to say that I believe, but it's hard to say I don't believe what happened here at Ape Canyon. It's really hard.
It'd be nice I haven't been on that side of the U.S. up in the Pacific Northwest. It would be pretty cool to, take a field trip up there.
Oh, man.
So,
if I'm getting boulders thrown at me, man, game over. I'm out.
Yeah, again, you don't hear, for the most part, most reports about Bigfoot are extremely non-aggressive reports and sightings and things like that. It's very few and far between where you hear about, and extremely rare on that side, on that coast of the U.S., extremely rare. But again, where do I stand on this? We're 100 years out, obviously, and information gets stretched, and sometimes people exaggerate over time and this and that, and it's hard to find that information. So the further we go on, the harder it's going to be to find the details, legitimate details about this. But going off what we know, I would say that I believe something occurred there in July 24th, 1924, I believe it was. Something occurred. I don't think this was some kind of deliberate sham by these guys. I don't think so.
To me, it's just, and we talked about this in episode 1 with the Patterson film. This even goes back further to the 1920s.
Yeah.
I mean, you could sit here and say, well, maybe it was a bunch of guys that wanted to mine there. Yeah. And they didn't want to go through the proper channels. They knew someone was there. Hey, we know this is a honey hole. Let's dress up like a bunch of hairy creatures and scare these people off. 1920s, there were stories out there, but Bigfoot was not really known. There was never even, quote unquote, a Bigfoot name yet.
Right.
So where do you come up with that idea? Let's just get a bunch of, and again, how are you going to get costumes enough to trick somebody?
Yeah.
Just like in the 1960s when, again, I know it's bad analogy, but Planet of the Apes, you can tell the apes are fake. I mean, it's an amazing movie for its time, but you know it's fake. So if I'm out there and I see, what looks to be a fake ape suit, I'm not going to be that scared. I'm going to go out there guns ablaze and get the hell away from here. I'm going to start shooting you.
And if Beck and Smith and the rest of the guys were truthful in what they reported, what they thought they saw, looking at 8-9 foot tall creatures
that are throwing boulders,
then you're talking about some other excavators out there who, and gold miners who they would have had to been standing at least each one of them, at least our height. No, much taller than us.
Taller than that. Super strength because they're not throwing pebbles. They're throwing giant rocks, knocking chunks off of a wooden cabin.
Yeah, and then jumping on top of the
roof, trying to break the door down. Something crawled underneath the cabin. It was trying to break through the floor.
Yeah.
Like I said, and again, I know I sound like I'm just, drinking the Kool-Aid here, but it's just, to me, it's hard to debunk some of this stuff. You tell me you had an encounter, I'm going to believe you. I had a comment, not on YouTube, on another social media site. Guy said his brother said it jumped down right in front of him and disappeared right in front of him. I don't know the guy. I have never met him before in my life, but I believe him. Well, what has he got to tell me? I mean, we just got a small channel here, just trying to have some fun here and search for the truth. You tell me you've had an incident, I can't say I don't believe you. Right. I'm going to ask you what happened,
right.
And I might make an assumption in my head like that seems a little far-fetched, but something like this, when we talk about the Patterson film first episode, and now this Ape Canyon incident, and this Ape Canyon incident to me is more bizarre, and it seems more truthful than the Patterson film. You can go all day. Did they have someone in the costume? Did they not? This just, like I said, to sit around a campfire and say, how can we make this trip interesting? Oh, I know what we could do. Let's say these ape creatures attacked us. And again, like I said, we won't be able to come here anymore. There goes our bread and butter. We're not going to be able to make money. Because you just said it. They didn't talk about it till the 60s, till Patterson found them. So, again, it's just very hard to not believe.
Yeah, and, most of the time when you talk about most Bigfoot encounters or sightings, aggressive or not, most of it's just individual creatures, entities, whatever you want to call them, animals. There are reports, and there have been, and we'll probably tackle some of those too, more of those, where it's several individuals, quote unquote, family of Bigfoots. But very rarely, in fact, this is one of the only cases I can think of where it's a group of, not only a group of creatures or animals, but they're aggressive. Often, even if you find a group, it's non-aggressive. So,
I've read stories,
Yeah,
it depends on how far down the rabbit hole you want to go with this.
Yeah,
it really does. Like you said, they're different. They can go up north. They can go up to 10, 12 feet high.
Yeah.
The further south you get, the smaller they get. And then there are reports in Florida of what's called a skunk ape, which certain people you ask, it's part of Bigfoot's family, and some people say it's not, that's a whole other animal there.
Yeah, the fur on the ones in the Pacific Northwest is darker, almost blackish, dark brown. They said the ones in Florida and then in, I think, the Carolinas or so is almost like an orange, orangutan type. Or even lightish orange, I should say.
That's interesting.
But again, we're trying to do is seek answers. We know that there's a phenomenon out there. We're not going to say what it is. I know we both have our, presumptions about what we think it might be. But we're always interested in what the viewers, what you guys think it might be. And, the idea here is as we, further continue to explore this subject, we're going to try to head out. We've talked about it before, possibly to East Texas and, scope around a little bit, some of the reports out there, possibly try to track down some of the areas where...
It's amazing how many sightings there are, and you can pull it up. Google search it, sightings of Bigfoot in the U.S. There are very few places on the map that there are not a sighting. You could throw a dart blindfold and hit a spot that there's been a sighting. And again, it just depends. Some of this stuff, like I said, it's further down the rabbit hole you go, the little scarier it gets. It's there's something, like I've said this before, something is happening. And I don't know why, especially government or the people that don't believe in this, you just chalk this all up as this, it's just a big hoax. There's just people that are on drugs, they're having hallucinations. Not everyone has that, and hopefully we'll dive into this, like I said, Survivor Man, like I said, he did a series on this. It was a woman and their husband, they lived way out in the sticks out in California. And he was at work, and it was late one night. Well, all of a sudden, she looks out, and it's just standing there. 10-foot creature. That's what she said. Calls the cops. The cops come out immediately because they know it's a remote area. They come out there. She said it ran off into this. It's almost like there was a little opening, and it's all trees around. And there's really no way through besides where they went through. They ran in there, and they looked. They didn't see anything. Well, somebody asked one of the cops, well, did you look up? Maybe it was up in the tree. And the cops, I didn't want to look up. I mean, like I said, we've talked about going on locations and stuff. We want to find out what's going on. And it's fun. This is a lot of fun. The conversations and then going out there is going to be fun. But it's not going to be that fun if we actually come across one, for me anyway. Because you're going to see, a grown man, probably start to cry. But no, let us know what you're thinking, and let us know if you've had encounters. We'll gladly share them. We're always thinking about what's the next Bigfoot episode going to be. There's plenty of stuff out there, but we want to know what you had, what happened to you. Like we've said before, we'd love to do a video just based on the comments. Like, hey, this person here had this kind of this and here, and let's figure it out. Let's get to the bottom of this together.
Right.
So once again, if you haven't seen or read or heard anything, read about it. Let us know what you think. Let us know how we're doing. If you like what we're doing, like I said, we want to keep doing this. We want to go out on location, but if there's only 5 people watching this, I mean, we might be just doing this for ourselves. But yeah, that's, I guess that's about it.
Yeah.
And again, thanks for stopping by and search for the truth.
Bye.